Hello, everyone, and welcome to Anatomy of an Adaptation. Usually, this is a podcast that aims to compare and contrast classic novels with their cinematic adaptations, but today we have a very special episode. Because very recently, I, Nicolo Grasso, the host of the show, was contacted by none other than Josh Olson, the screenwriter of A History of Violence. He managed to find the episode thanks to a friend of his. He listened to it. He really enjoyed the conversation that I and the good Orin Luke and Randy Burrows had. And he just wanted to jump on the podcast and, confirm some of our theories, dispel others, and just talk about the process of adapting a graphic novel into a screenplay. So listen to this conversation that I had with screenwriter and also fellow podcaster Josh Olson, and enjoy.
Whatever it was, a couple months ago, a friend of mine sent me a link, and not to be, but it's like people write stuff and talk about it, and it's amazingly gratifying. I mean, here we are coming up on, God help me, 20 years. Sight and Sound did a best of the century issue a couple months ago, and they picked History of Violence as the movie from 2005, and I was like, oh. But I don't always check out everything. But a friend of mine was like, "Hey, just heard this podcast on adaptations. Like, you might want to check it out. It's not the usual stuff." And I was like, "All right, I'll give it 10 minutes based on his record and listen all the way through." And the thing that I really, really enjoyed, and we can talk about anything you want as in depth as you want. One of the things that you run into a lot is people think with adaptations that they're like, "Oh, you just transcribe the book." And I've done a ton of adaptations, and none of them have ever been the same. But nothing makes me happier than with people, especially people who like the film, then read the book, and then they go, "Oh." And what really got me about what you guys said, and predominantly you, but the other two as well, everybody kept hitting really good points, is you guys were saying things that were like almost verbatim in my brain while I was doing the adaptation, and things I've never talked about, certainly in electronic media. I may have discussed a little bit, like sometimes I go off and I talk at schools about screenwriting and adaptations and stuff. And I was just like, this is really good. And, I've always been aware of how hard it is to do anything in this world. I do a podcast with Joe Dante, and we are very fortunate that we started out with some name recognition, mostly his, and we can get big guests. I know how hard it is to like not have that, and so I'm a big fan of like, when I find people like you doing good work, I want to just sort of like do everything I can to kind of encourage them. And I just, so I reached out and I was like, it's just amazing. I mean, you really hit a lot of really good points. It's one thing to hear somebody sort of regurgitate stuff you may have said in an interview as though they thought of it, and you're like, yeah. But you were like regurgitating stuff that I thought and never said. So I thought, yep, let me say hi and just tell these guys what a great job they did, and that's how we ended up here.
That's amazing. No, honestly, thank you so much for being here. Also, on behalf of the other two guests who were on that episode, because A History of Violence has been, as I discussed in that episode, like for me, a very personal film, just in my growing up as a film lover, wannabe writer, wannabe filmmaker, because it was the first time I truly encountered something that felt mature, something that felt not right for my age. I want to say like 14 or 15 when I watched it, so not the best time to see it probably, but it definitely influenced me in some way. And like revisiting the graphic novel just in preparation for that conversation that we had was so eye-opening to just like, sometimes you have that spark, right? Where you're reading something and you think there's a really good story here, but the direction that they take it in is not necessarily something that I was envisioning, something that I was expecting. And you just made it your own, right? How did that come about? I'm super curious. How you even found the graphic novel? Was it like a commission?
So one of the few things, and it's fine. Like I'm much more interested in the fact that you got sort of all the creative stuff, the kind of that stuff right. There were a few. Somebody, I can't remember who, thought like I didn't write it as a spec. I was hired to write by the studio. And what happened is there was a studio exec who knew me. He had been several years earlier, had been my original agent's assistant and in fact was one of the people who sort of found me when I was first trying to find an agent. His name's Cale Boyner. He's now like the big muckety muck over at Legendary, and it's like if you're watching a Dune movie or a Godzilla movie or something like that, his name is front and center, and he's doing great. But he was a fan of my stuff, and I had just recently gotten into the Writers Guild. I've been writing a lot of stuff for the kind of how old are you again?
28.
Do you know about the straight to video world of the like 80s and 90s? I mean, it's hilarious. This is
I'm very aware of it.
Yeah, I'm sure you are, but it's sort of like talking about like the drive-in, world back in the 60s. I kind of fallen into that world. The script I had written got made into a movie. It started out as a very promising project. By the time it was done, it was a catastrophe and put out by this sort of small video company. But I was making a living, but I was sort of constantly writing scripts that I was hoping to sell and get into the studio system. And I finally did in the early 2000s, like 2000, 2001, something like that. And I sold a script to a studio. And what that does is, first of all, whoops, can you hear me? Okay.
Sorry, yeah.
Disappear. First of all, what it does is, like with a spec sale, for instance, you automatically get enough points to get into the Writers Guild, and now because they have to hire you, and now you're. So I got into the Writers Guild on that, and then it also puts you on this kind of, lists where like studio executives and producers around town. This is like somebody you can hire now to work in a WGA signatory system. And there's always this kind of flush of the new, like, hey, here's a new guy, and I'd written this fun action script that a lot of people liked, and Cale had been at New Line for a couple of years, and he was very excited because now he could, like, when he was at the studio, he couldn't just hire me to write something, and because I'm not in the guild. So he called me up, and he had been to my house several years earlier, and we can talk about this and as we get there a little, I don't know, however you want to do it. But I read, I grew up reading comic books, graphic novels. I did want to chastise you guys at the beginning of your episode. You're all kind of like, you were talking about graphic novels the way people used to like 30 years ago. And I'm like, dude, that jury came back a long time ago. It's its own literary form, but it's pretty respectable. But he had come over to my house a couple of years earlier, and I think he had seen History of Violence on my shelf. And he was like, "Oh, I said, you like that book? We're thinking about doing it." And I remember saying like, it's a great title and the premise is great. I'm not a. And so Cale and I had this kind of perverse relationship. So he thought it would be, he's going to bring me in on something. I think he thought it'd be funny to bring me in on that to kind of make me squirm a little bit. And this story I have told, so forgive me, but I was told up front, we're doing this movie. We're only meeting with a handful of like big A-list writers. So you're not going to get the job, but come in and pitch for it because I want my team to get to know you there. So when I bring you in on something that you do have a chance on, they'll be familiar with you. So like the onus was on me to simply be, charming and good in a room, and that's it. I was never going to sell the thing. And for me, and this is an incredibly important lesson. I think this is we could stop recording in 2 minutes and I will have said the most valuable thing I can possibly say to anybody who wants to be a screenwriter. I sort of stumbled into, and I was doing this with my own work, but it really hit me afterwards. It was like, I had license to do whatever I wanted to do with this book. I'm not going to get it. I don't have to sort of second guess why they want to do it. And I had, when I had read the book several years ago, I had bought it because for a lot of reasons, but I was familiar with the writer. He's good. I liked Vince Locke, the artist. And I thought, but most importantly, it was a really compelling title and concept. And I immediately, and you kind of talked about some of this on your episode, but it's like, it conjured up kind of ideas immediately, just reading the bare bones description of what happens. And then I found myself reading it, and the farther I got into it, kind of going, they're not hitting it. They're not doing it's so fertile. And I just feel like they're just kind of driving over it and just so they can get to the action. And I got really frustrated. But then you're like, yeah, whatever, and you move on. But all of a sudden I was given a license, since I was never going to get the job, to essentially take the parts of the book I liked, do it as though I had written it, which in some circumstances, Nicola, is plagiarism. You know, if I had just like written the script as an original the way I did, it would have been, I'd have to change a lot more. But all of a sudden you have license. They own the
Mm.
rights. They're looking to adapt it. Not every adaptation has to be faithful. So I went in and I pitched the version that, honest to God, I every now and then I pull out my beat sheet for the pitch. You go in with little sort of bullet points to make sure you hit them all. And it's pretty much the movie.
Wow.
Right down to the one thing I always thought we'd never get to do is that last scene. But again, it was one of those things where I'm like, they're never going to hire me, so let me do what I want to do. And it turned out, I guess, in retrospect, sort of since found out, that they had kind of the same thing. They really liked the premise and the title and aspects of it, but they just weren't, you know, knocked out by where it went and how it handled them. And to be clear, John Wagner's a terrific writer. I think it's just one of those things where you just go down one alley and somebody else sees a different one, you know.
Mhm.
And but I think what was going on is the writers they were talking to were, for the most part, coming in and trying to adapt the book in the more traditional sense.
Right.
And I was going, I'm not getting this job, so what the hell? I just have to be charming. And so I went in, and I think in those meetings, what happened is they sort of realized they were like, yeah, we have those problems too. And so Kit, it was so funny, for like weeks I would get these phone calls. He's like, yeah, I just want to tell you, like, you did a great job. You're not getting the job, but you did a great job. They loved you. And then I get a call. He's like, hey, I just want to tell you, you're not getting the job, but it's down to you and three other guys. And it's like, yeah, you're not getting the job, but it's like you and another guy. And then I still remember him calling me up and going, you know how I keep calling you, telling you you're not getting the job? It's like, you got the job. But the lesson was, you got to be, God, this sounds childish, but it's true. You got to be true to yourself. Like, if I had to go in, if the mandate had been go in and pitched a faithful adaptation of this book, and, you know, that means deviations and changes and all kinds of things. But, you know, as you have now
Of
read
course.
the
Yeah.
both, you know, we did way more than that. I couldn't have done it and I wouldn't have gotten the job. And it's like, that is really, I think something you sort of know, but it really helps to have reinforced. It's helped me in my career where, like, I had, especially in those sort of early days after History came out, I won't say the name, but there was a big project that I was offered. Like, you don't have to come and pitch. You can write this thing, and it's since gone on to be a big franchise. And, you know, if I had written it successfully, had been made, you'd be zooming with me on my mansion in the moon. Like, I would own the moon. I'd be so rich. And I remember just reading this stuff. I was like, I can't. I have no feel for this material whatsoever. And if I take the first massive paying job that comes my way, if I'm not feeling it, there aren't going to be any more, you know?
Mm.
But the key lesson with getting the job for History was just like, don't bother yourself with trying to figure out what they want, because you aren't always going to know. In fact, you usually won't. And just walk in and be the best version of you, both as a person and as a writer, as you can. And, you know, walk out knowing you did that. And there's a million reasons you're going to get a job, a million reasons you're not going to get a job. But man, this one worked out. So,
Truly in great ways, I would say as well.
oh, you
Because
can. I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm the biggest, you know, a huge Cronenberg fan, and they were, and you guys talked about Spider a little bit. That was his last film. And even though he had worked with New Line before and Bob Shea, there was this sense, because it's the movie business and people are a little bit knee jerk. It was like, oh, his last movie made $1 billion. And anybody listening who hasn't seen Spider, nobody invested money in Spider thinking it was going to make them rich. It's not a movie that makes a fortune.
Audiences don't flock to Spider.
Yeah.
Feel good movie of the summer.
It's an amazing film, and it doesn't get talked about enough in his pantheon. But what was really interesting was that he'd gotten new agents, and he wanted to sort of take a break from, you know, scrambling to put together tiny budgets for little indie films, and he wanted to do a studio film to sort of A, get out of that world for a little bit, and I think B, to sort of like put himself back on the, you know, on the map in a little way. And not, if I make it sound cynical, it shouldn't, but I mean, he just wanted to, you know, do some kind of big studio film. And this was apparently the first script they sent to him, and he said, stop sending me scripts, I want to do this. But it took forever. I remember getting the phone call that he was interested in doing it, and even then I'd been in business for years, and if I'd stopped and thought, I would have been like, oh, this will be tough. But I was like, oh, so we have our director, right? And they were like, well, I'm like, what's the matter with you? And we went through a couple of weeks, maybe. It felt like longer. It could have been months. Of other directors. They were talking to other directors, including some pretty big ones. And a couple of things happened. One is I was shameless. I took advantage of my relationship with the studio, where they would tell me who they had met with and how it had gone and what their concerns were, and I would immediately call Dave's agent and tell her everything because I wanted him to get the job. And at one point, there was a big director who was like, "Oh, this is going to be my first serious grown-up movie," and they were kind of interested. He was a big director, and I said, he said that about his last movie. And his last movie, and they were like, "Oh shit!" And they looked at the last movie, and
Huh.
they're like, "Yeah, let's." But then, to their credit, they took a look at Spider, and they were like, "Oh shit, he still got it," And they were smart enough to recognize what I said. This is
Nice.
not a movie anybody thought would be a fortune. So a lot of things came together, and then like David came on the project and told me, I can't remember if you mentioned this or no, you didn't, because I think he had never read the graphic novel, and
Mm.
they I don't have any control over this, so people sometimes say like I had taken the other people's names off the cover, but it was like sent to him by the studio, and even if I had, they would have somehow, though, the studio just sent him a thing and it just said script by Josh Olson, and so he didn't know it was a graphic novel, and he was let's just say worse on that subject even than you guys were at the beginning of your show. He said to me like, if I known it was a graphic novel, I wouldn't have done it, and if I had read the graphic novel, I wouldn't have done it. So I got
Fair
very
enough.
lucky with
Fair
that.
enough.
Yeah, but um yeah, and then I don't know if you want to, so he came out. We sat down for a solid week. I would go visit him in his hotel. We'd go through the script. We'd talk about it. And then I went back and did another draft that we then took into the studio. And that was essentially, there's a lot of little tweaks, but like you'd read them side by side. That was essentially the thing that got shot finally. And somewhere in there, we had, um, I guess I can say it now. I almost feel like you have to be circumspect. Nicolas Cage was originally attached for the lead. And I'll say two things.
Interesting.
One, I think Nicolas Cage is the greatest actor of my generation. And two, I think he's all wrong for this movie. But I was still like, it'll be fine. But I feel like, don't you think, like the instant somebody walks in and goes, "Hey, you have a past. You used to be this dark, twisted guy who used to kill people," you're going, "Well, of course he did." And then he had a conflict. What was it? Masters of War? Is that the name of the film?
Lord
I
of
can't remember.
War.
It's Lord of War. Yeah, it was a good film. He had to go off and do
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And this ball was already rolling. And so that's how we ended up with Vigo, because there was still some, like Vigo at that point didn't quite, even though he just done Lord of the Rings, didn't quite get a $30 million movie made. But everything was sort of in place. And the crazy thing was he had been in my mind. I sort of kept bouncing back and forth between him and Sean Penn when I was writing the character. So it was
Okay.
amazing that we ended up with like one of the actors who was in my head. And yeah, he came on. He had some notes. He had some real issues with the end of the film is written. The end of the script is written that I was happy to address. Um, and I think my favorite when I first sat down with David, I think he was sort of challenging me a little, and it went well. There was one character in the script. The studio will tell you stuff, and they'll give you notes, and it's like you try to accommodate them. But they had one big note that they felt there needed to be another character with a history of violence to sort of tie
Oh,
into the
okay.
theme, and they wanted Maria to have a father character who, and I came up with this guy who'd been in Vietnam, and he was sort of like this surly guy, and he had kind of some, and he ends up getting killed about a third of the way through the film. And the first thing that happens, I sat down with David, and he said, "Okay, I'll tell you what." He's like, "I want to get rid of the father." He's like, "I hate," and this will blow your mind, and we'll keep coming back to it because I feel the same way. He goes, "I hate theme. I hate writing for the
Ah.
theme." And this guy is like so thematic. He might as well wear a T-shirt that says, "I have a history of violence too." And I was so happy, and I think that was a defining moment in our collaboration because it was sort of like, let me
Hmm.
test this guy, and I was like, "Bless you, sir."
At the same level, right? At the same
Yeah,
wavelength.
yeah, very much so. And he kept saying a couple of things like, "We just fucked Robert Duvall out of a part." So
I can see that. I can see that.
yeah,
Yeah, I can imagine that's always a bit of a struggle, right? When someone tells you like the movie has to be about something, like the script has to lead up to something, and so it's all about just finding meaning and retroactively building character instead of just having
yeah.
theme come out of the actions, right?
Oh yeah, and it's also, and I've written, a ton of stuff since then, and I do find there's some projects where you kind of have to for various reasons. But for me, and I remember doing a panel once with a couple of other writers and mentioning that like David and I hate writing from theme, and a couple of the other writers just like burst out laughing. They're like, "Have you seen your movie?" And I'm like, I'm not saying there's not a lot of strong thematic elements to the thing, and there's not a point to it. It's just that it came from an organic place for
Hmm.
both of us. He didn't read it and go intellectually, well, this ties into some of my ideas about duality and people, blah, 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 blah. It was just, it clicked with him. And we are both coming from an emotional place. And I feel like if you're good and you're tapped into yourself and what you care about, you do that. And then you come to the end and the thing kind of tells you what it was about when you get there. Um, and that can help you going through and doing rewrites too. Can you realize like, oh yeah, it's not about that here or whatever. But it is gratifying when you write something and you read it and you're like, yeah, this actually came from me. It's, we were, the phrase I was like is like being in charge of the metaphor. Like we were on top of the metaphor. It was like it never deviated and it wasn't like a conscious attempt. It just tied into a lot of stuff I was really interested in and still am. And he felt the same way. So yeah, we never once talked about what the movie's about.
Hmm.
I mean, beyond it's about a guy who works in a diner.
It's like the plotting stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And you would know when something was wrong because it didn't feel right. And the reason it doesn't feel right is that you are consciously or unconsciously working towards a cohesive goal. And when you're not on that track, you can feel it.
Hmm. I'm wondering if this was one of those occasions where you also were present on set, actively like helping out with potential like small changes and things like
Oh, I
that,
don't know if helping out.
or
Oh, no, there were no changes made. Actually, the one thing I should add too, because you talked a bit about this, I want and I think David is still annoyed at me to this day for having talked about this, but such is life. Um, the original script didn't have the sex scenes in it,
yeah,
and
yeah.
while we were doing our meetings, I kept sitting there and I'm like, on the one hand, I'm not an auteurist at all. I despise the auteur theory. I'm a working screenwriter, and it exists primarily to, keep me down, essentially, and
Mm.
to affect my ability to earn a living, let alone the creative issues I have with the probably the most collaborative art form in the world. I'll be contributing to one person. Um, I think Steven Soderbergh is one of the best people around there, where he takes like he has an assumed name for his cinematographer because he's his own cinematographer, but he doesn't like seeing his name more than once on a poster. I'm like, I respect that and everyone still calls it a Soderbergh film. It's like you earn the love of all the people out there who worked on your film by not taking a film by credit. So, but that said, I'm also a giant Cronenberg fan, and I was like, I really want this to feel like a Cronenberg film. And I can't come up with any way to sort of inject body horror into it, but maybe we can come up with some kind of Crash style kind of explorations of sexuality. And he said, and first time I've ever heard this word, it's a wonderful word. I don't want it to feel too Cronenbergy. And I said to him, I'm going to come up with a sex scene so good you're going to have to put it in. And when I finally came back, I had come up with two, and he loved them. And so that was, and it cracks me up because every now and then I'll read like something like it's the most Cronenbergian scene you've ever seen, and I'm like, I think that's probably because it was conceived by someone who's a Cronenberg fan. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It was like he's just coming up with scenes. I'm coming up with scenes that should feel like he made them. Was kind of,
like
but
tailor
yeah. So
made
there
for
was,
him.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, I went up on the set. I was up there for kind of a week and a half or so, but it was really just to kind of visit. When you get an opportunity to watch David Cronenberg work, you go. The work was all done. There was no changes made to the set or to the script. At some point, I got a little bit involved. Maria was also Maria and I are both from Philadelphia, and I sort of ended up working with Vigo a little bit on his accent. They had an accent coach as well. And he's fine. He never quite gets it, but it is a brutal accent, and it's a horrible one to listen to anyway. Um, but yeah, he didn't quite. But anyway, so he would come up to me after some scene and go, "Did I get it?" I'd be like,
Close enough.
but I wasn't. That's about the extent of my actual work on the set. Mostly it was kind of just watching them do stuff, and so I made sure I could come up at any point. I made sure to kind of bridge. I want to see as much as I could. So I was there for the last few days of Ed Harris and the first few days of William Hurt, and got to kind of
Nice.
watch them work and talk to them, and that was an amazing experience. I mean, they're all incredible people. I mean, Maria is, and that was something else. I think was it you? Somebody said, and sorry if I'm bouncing around,
It's okay.
but not everybody catches this. She is her character, and then enhanced by her performance, is so important to this film. She's like the emotional heart of it, and I've actually written a couple of other scripts that have had the kind of reaction. Where she said, "What is it? Oh, I'm just the wife," and then she got more into it. And it's like, yeah, there's more going on here. I had a film that I almost directed, it kind of crashed and burned a while back, but the we were auditioning actresses. We had some of the best in the town coming in, young women in their 20s. And I remember like three of them came up to me at one point and they said, it's so nice not to be auditioning for, the main character's girlfriend. And the hilarious thing is, you're the main character's girlfriend, but there's a
There's
lot
more
more
to
going
it.
on. There's more to it. And yeah, so I love that reaction from her, and I love that you got that because
But
as you say in the
it
book,
was one
she
of
just
those
sort of goes, "Aren't you
completely.
great?"
That was the frustrating thing. Like going from the film, like the experience for me was watching the movie bunch of times when I was younger, revisiting it, reading the graphic novel, waiting a couple of years, and then 1-2 punch of graphic novel and film is that there is that potential there. There is this element of like, okay, this is like what's she feeling? How's she feeling about discovering these things about her husband's past? And she's
Yeah,
completely passive in the graphic novel. It's like she's almost an afterthought in the second half. While here she is, for me, I stand by it. She's like the core, the emotional core of the story. Without her, everything else crumbles. You don't need the father character. She
yeah,
works
yeah.
by her own.
Well, and that really was the center of everything. It was like what's going on with him inside during a situation like
Hmm.
this, and then how are the people around him reacting to it? Because one of the things that really bugged me about the book is, yeah, everybody just sort of like, oh, hey, dad killed a bunch of mob guys in the past, and you're like, even if in the book he's the sort of noble hero and all the rest of that, that's
Hmm.
still a kind of disturbing thing to find out. And it was like that to me was so much of the key for what I ended up doing, and it took the story in so many different places. Was how does this really affect the family around you? And wouldn't it be interesting? And you can read it however you want, but I know Vigo played this for the beginning, at least of it. You're not sure whether or not you certainly aren't sure whether or not he is the guy. I mean, if you guess, that's fine. It's not, we're not trying to surprise you necessarily. It's not the movie doesn't hinge on your surprise.
Hmm.
But also, like, wouldn't it be interesting, like, after 20 years, wouldn't you kind of, I remember stuff I did 20 years ago, but it's not at the forefront of my mind. And in my viewing of the film and in writing it, I also like the first time he sees Ed Harris, he genuinely doesn't know who he is. And I think he kind of played it that way. And then slowly there's sort of a moment you're like, oh shit. Oh right.
Piecing things together. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And that seemed to be much more interesting than just like dad's hiding from the fact that he took out some mob guys back in the day who had it coming.
Yeah, yeah, just going full vigilante at the end with the action and the shootouts. Even that, just the whole feeling, was that something that you were already thinking of just in the script, or was it more in the direction and the production of just keeping it a bit more grounded in reality? Because in the graphic novel, there's
Well,
like Uzi shootouts and grenade launchers. It gets a bit out there.
yeah, it was one of the fun. I met Andy Helfer, who was the editor of the graphic novel. I met him at
Oh,
Comic
nice.
Con the year thing came out. I met John Wagner at the premiere, and he hugged me, and he told me he thought the movie was better than the book, which I was relieved because he's this like big burly sort of a Scotsman, is it? Who's sort of like he seems like somebody who would like beat the shit out of you if you screw up his work or something, and so that was nice. But yeah, Andy was very nice, but I remember him saying something to me at one point as he walked out of the room. He's like, I understand why you had to give it that Hollywood ending, but I wish you kept the book. But I guess that's too much for a studio film. And I was like, Hollywood ending. But that ending of the book was just so extreme where, yeah, they're forgive me, but you've read it way more recently than I have. I have not read it since I got the job. That was the second time I read the book, and I've never gone back to it. His buddy is, they cut off his arms and his legs, they burned him, and they're hanging him from a meat hook, and there are guys whose job is to just watch him all day and beat him whenever they feel like it for
Yeah, yeah.
decades. And I thought that I know a little bit about organized crime. That's not a thing. Yeah, you fuck with them, they'll kill you. They might kill your family. That's a huge investment of time and money, I think.
Playing the long game, just
And I was
just
gonna
out of
say
spite.
to get to comic books, it's weird. I just watched the new season of Daredevil, which was kind of fun, and they sort of do a version of that, but in spite of the fact that it's a superhero thing, it's much more grounded.
Mm.
Their version of it, it actually makes emotional sense. And I was like, oh yeah, see, it could be. But yeah, that ending, it was just like, this is you gotta, it's got to be, yeah, as you say, more grounded, more human. The one big change that you see on screen as opposed to not seeing, like the father, was David called me up at one point early on. And it's funny because no matter how far I was getting away from the book, you're still conscious of it. It's still there, you know. And in my first draft of the script, Richie was still his friend, even though that relationship was completely different, and it plays out very much like the version you've seen. He's now the
Hmm.
mob guy because they were in the mob together. They weren't two good kids. David goes, he goes, why didn't you make them brothers? And it's one of those things where you just like, ugh, smack your head,
Of
like,
course.
because I'm in it, because it's so friggin' obvious it didn't occur to me. And I do, and I'll say this in my defense: if I had generated the entire story myself, of course it'd have been brothers, but there was still that element of like, I'm coming from the outside and I'm not fully thinking of it as an original thing.
Hmm.
So that was an amazing, you know, if all David said is get rid of the dad, sure you can have your sex scenes and let's make them brothers. I'd have been like, these are some of the best notes I've ever gotten in my life.
And was the because I remember reading some of the Treeman interviews, was the change from like Italian Americans to Philadelphia Irish
Oh,
mobsters?
it's
Did
because
that come from you
casting.
actually, or was it just
No,
from the
if it had been
just casting?
if Cage was still in it, they'd have been Italian. That was like, you know, we got all these. None of these people really read Italian. Can we make them Irish? And or make it, and we're like, yeah, you're gonna have, William. You've got William Hurt and Ed Harris. So you're gonna have to come. They can't be Italian. I don't think I came up with Irish. That seemed like the obvious one. But then it was like, where can we put it that's not so obvious, like New York or The Sopranos kind of own New Jersey.
Mm.
And I remember being so happy because like I'm from Philadelphia. I'm intrinsically and I make this work for me. It can be a strength. I'm intrinsically lazy. So I was like, oh, I know a place that has mob where we wouldn't, and where I'm going, I don't have to do any research. They said, how about Philadelphia? And everyone went, that's great.
Nice.
One of the things David did, he made this change somewhere, and I don't know how. By the time I caught wind of it, it was too late. He somehow has the implication is that William Hurt's Irish mob boss answers to the mob in Boston. And I'm like, you've never been to either city, have you? Because that's a long way to go. That's not New York to New Jersey. That's not Tony Soprano driving over the bridge. That's a 7 hour drive, man. It's but nobody, it's not a documentary, so
It's easy to overlook those things. It's easy to overlook
yeah.
them.
Oh, but to get back to your thing about realism, one of the things that they got away with that I'm always amazed because it is again one of the few things where I was like, what are you doing? Vigo trained with what is it, Krav Maga, some kind, like high end martial arts combat stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember I may even have a conversation with David because sort of like it's like, no, he was just like a mob guy. He was okay killing people. Like those guys aren't Steven Seagal characters. And I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, we're going to get killed because these moves he's doing look like they come out of a Steven Seagal film. And again, everything else is so well done and so grounded. Nobody ever seems bothered by that. So I'm like, okay, works for me.
Worked out. Everything was so quick,
Yeah.
like especially in the heat of the moment with the way the story is unfolding. It's a testament to the effectiveness of it that you're not thinking about the actual
Yeah.
moves. Also, just the lockdown
Like,
camera, all
yep.
those things help.
Yeah. And it's quick. There's only about 2 minutes of violence in the whole film or 2.5. But yeah, in my mind, his character had always been, if you went back, he's basically like Robert De Niro in Mean Streets.
Mm.
He's just this nutty guy who's, and obviously he has resolved his
Yeah.
issues since then. But
Yeah, and I was wondering also just about the ending of the film, because you said that was was considered a Hollywood ending by the
Yeah.
producer, and that's
No, editor of the graphic novel, not the producer.
sorry, editor of the graphic
Yeah.
novel. Sorry, but yeah, I still think that's well. Was that something that you started from in the writing process when you were thinking like, where do I want to go with this story? Was it just like always aiming for that ending, because it just ties everything together in such an impactful way that even in the conversation that we had on the podcast, like everyone takes away something different from it. It's
Mm-hmm.
a conclusive, satisfying ending that leaves it up to each viewer to take something out of it. And for you, it seemed to be very hopeful considering the actual like final lines in the script. But was it always something you were aiming for, or did you change, just creatively speaking? I'm curious during the process where it would end up.
Yeah, I'm trying to find. Let's see, can I find it? I should have done. Is this the? No, this is not. Damn it! Where are my bullet points? Very frustrating. I've got them somewhere. Shit.
They're saved up.
I should have had them ready. Yeah, just because. Oh wait, here. Yeah, 2 pages of bullet notes. Um, Comes home, dinner is set for him. He joins the family in silence. Fade out. Like that was the original pitch. And I kept, again, it was such an amazing experience working with New Line. I mean, they were fantastic, but it was like, I just kept every step of the way. I was like, they're going to make us change that. That came out of a couple of things. Oh, by the way, somebody, I can't remember, I apologize. It was you may have told the story and they got something a little bit wrong. But it goes to the ending where, I said the script paginated out in such a way that, I'd thrown in the last line about them sitting around the table, and I threw in the line, but there's hope, because it was a desperate attempt to keep the scene. And it's like, and if the studio thinks it's hopeless, but we go, well, no, but there's hope, they'll let us keep it. And I don't think I've ever stated anywhere what I feel personally about whether or not there is hope for this family or not. Because it doesn't matter what I think, it's
Mm-hmm.
what are you taking out of it? It was designed to be that. And but I remember saying to David, it's page whatever 91 on the script. 90 is just, but there's hope. And I once jokingly said to him, I go, how are you going to shoot page 91? And David said, I won't. And but that came from, this is a fun story. Like I got to be at the BAFTAs the following year. I got nominated for that too. It was an incredible experience. And David Strathairn was there, who's one of my favorite actors. I'm a giant John Sayles fan.
Fantastic.
I love him. He's just one of the greats. And we were sitting, and you get to go to these events with folks, and you're all sitting at the bar and having conversations. And was talking to him. He was there for Good Night and Good Luck. And we started talking. Ended up talking about History of Violence, and he talked about how much he liked the ending. And it suddenly hit me. I was like, "Oh, wait a minute! You like the ending? You have no problem with it?" He's like, "No." And I since had this conversation with John Sayles too, who didn't get it either, which is great, because here's the thing: you can steal mercilessly from anyone. The trick is to do it so well that the people you're stealing from don't notice. I don't want to ruin the ending for anyone who hasn't seen it. All I'm going to say is John Sayles' movie Limbo with David Strathairn has one of the greatest hard cut endings in the history of film, for my money. Do you know the film?
I don't actually.
It was like a week ago, I was almost like, he should watch this film before we talk, but I don't want to give away the ending.
Damn,
But
okay.
it is one of those movies. It's a great film. And it's one of those movies with a hard cut ending that just, I remember seeing in a theater, and I don't know what it is. I have this feel for these things. I love a movie that ends when it's over. The exception of Lord of the Rings. I'm fine with the 27 endings of Lord of the Rings because we've been with those characters for 3 years and we want the goodbyes to take their time.
It's warranted. It's warranted.
It's warranted. Yeah. Just 5 more minutes with Frodo and then I'll get out of here. But I remember sitting in a theater watching Limbo, and I start to feel it. And I was like, oh my God, is it going to? And then it goes cut to black. And 80% of the audience goes, what the fuck? And I'm sitting there going, oh, I love you, John Sayles. Because it ends, all I'll say is it ends when the real story of the movie is over. and it kind of tells you, I don't care about the plotty shit that you think you care about.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, and by the time you're done, like the end of History of Violence looks nothing like it. But I remember telling David that I was like, I stole it from a movie you're in. And even then, he didn't know what I was talking about. So I was like, all right, I did my job. But I love hard cut endings. I have heard one person close to him told me that David Chase was at least influenced by History of Violence with that
Oh,
ending
okay.
of Sopranos, which I will just cling to that belief till the day I die. But there was another one where I'm sitting there watching the end of the show that I'm loving with a bunch of friends, and again, everyone in the room is going, "What's wrong?" And I'm going, "He's a genius." you know, I love that stuff. I love it so much, and it was just really important to me that like the story is done now, and showing what they do after this is just seems, it doesn't serve a purpose. And in fact, the important question is, what do you think happens next? How do you think they deal with that stuff? And I really, not to be
Mm-hmm.
coy, I don't think David has either. Like, I'll never answer that question because, like, whatever I tell you doesn't make a difference. Oh, it's hope. It's great. They stay together forever. They live a nice long, the kid's fine. His little therapy. He gets over killing a man. But it's like, who cares? And I do remember a guy coming up to me after a screening once, and he wanted me to kind of tell him what happened next, and then also tell him he's a good man, right? At the end, he's like a good man. He's trying to do right and get over his past and everything. And I looked at about 8 feet behind him. There was this woman who's kind of looking at him. She was standing there with her fist balled, looking kind of annoyed. I think just because like she wanted to get out. And he's like, but he's a good man. He's good to his family. And I pointed. I said, "Is that your wife? Are you with her?" He goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Why didn't you ask her?" And
Can lead to a
hopefully they
very
had a nice
revealing
conversation.
conversation.
Yeah, hopefully. And to me, it's like I think probably the best movie ever that did that. It's not a smash cut ending, but a movie that throws it back to the audience is Do the Right Thing. Because there
Oh,
are
yeah.
to this day where people are talking about like, why did he throw that thing through the window? What's going on there? And da, da, da. And that film warranted on every level. But even if it just been a cheap exploitation movie, it's just a smart move to leave your audience with a question because you want them walking out going, "Where are we having dinner?" You want them walking out going, "Wait, did that mean, did I see, was that? No, you idiot." That's, now the movie's
Yeah.
living in their head. It's just a trick, but it's a good one if you can pull it off.
And after 30, 40 years, it's still generating conversations and discussions. That's something always that I find so frustrating recently. Like that's something like if we're watching this film and just all the movies that you mentioned and others that I love, I crave so much that type of conversation that is more revealing, not so much of the film itself, but of the other person that you're talking to. That
Sure.
it kills
Yeah.
me sometimes when I'm talking. There's occasionally conversations with some friends or people like younger than me, even like I'm very young, but there's people way younger than me who want to make films and want to get into it. We're always looking for just the easy answer, the easy
Yeah.
ending. Because there's, no, no, but you have to give people the message. You have to give them a moral of the story. I'm like, do
Oh,
you? Is that something that
yeah.
I imagine it's something you've struggled with over
Yeah.
over the
Sure, you
years.
can. And art can have an impact and does. And, but yeah, it's the point. Like to me, and I don't know, which came first, the chicken or the egg. I don't know if I'm a
Huh?
huge Springsteen fan because I think this way, or I think this way because I'm a huge Springsteen fan. But I have been since I was about 14 a gigantic Bruce fan, and in fact, I always write to music. This is the only thing I've written where I just listen to one thing. I had his "Darkness on the Edge of Town" on a constant loop, the album, while I was writing
Nice.
this, and there's all kinds of tiny little nods to it, some of which got cut, some didn't. But he's talked in interviews his whole life, and I remember like reading it, and it just always clicked with me. He's talked about, he's involved in a lifelong conversation with an audience, and that's the reason why I can listen to the first song of his that I heard when I was like 14 that I went, wow, and I can play it today in my car and it still speaks to me and it's saying something else, you know.
Hmm.
And so I know there are people who think it's like, this is my statement, you must get it, you must not misinterpret it. There's a movie, I forgot how bad it is, it's a terrible movie. It's the one with Sean Connery where he's the reclusive author, and there's the young black kid who finds him and wants to be a writer. You're all about now,
Oh,
dog.
Oh
It's
God, I
right.
don't remember.
I gotta look this up. What was it called? Oh my god.
Sean Connery. Oh gosh.
Yeah, who I love. Let's see. What is? Yes, here's Finding Forrester, and he plays
Oh,
this
okay,
kind
okay,
of.
yeah, yeah.
He's this like J.D. Salinger-esque author who's been reclusive forever, hasn't written anything in decades, and this young kid finds him, and they become friends. And he asks him why he stopped writing, and he talks about how like the top critic of the New York Times wrote a rave review of his book, but he completely misunderstood it, and that's why he quit writing. And I guess I've met one or two people like that in my life, but for the most part, any writer who thinks that way is just insane. Like, and obviously, whoever wrote that thinks that's a legitimate way to be. I'm like, that's crazy, man. It's like it's a dialogue, and nobody knows himself that well. And there's a great Tom Stoppard quote about when somebody really dives into your work and makes a case for something that you didn't do intentionally, but they make the case. He goes, it's like being caught at customs with a suitcase full of drugs. You could genuinely say you didn't put them there and you don't know how they got there, but you're still going to jail. And that stayed with me forever, you know? So yeah,
That's
it's
a
like,
great one.
you know, for whatever reason, this thing tapped into a lot of stuff for me personally, but I wanted to translate that to an audience and make it click with them in a way that would stay with them, that they would walk out thinking about and connecting to their own life. And, you know, and that's really important to me. So yeah, the idea of wrapping it all up in a bow and telling you what to think is just like, I don't like that. it's,
Mm, mm.
it seems antithetical to the job.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're still talking about it and why it was in the best of the century list, and why we are talking about it still very positively after 20 years at this point. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's getting close to
That's
the
right.
anniversary. How
Yeah.
was the experience of just the release of it afterwards? Because you already mentioned that you were getting very close to a huge project. Um, how has that been for you afterwards? Just like the aftermath of a history of
Yeah. No, it
violence.
was crazy. It was an amazing experience because, you know, some people come here with these dreams. I didn't. I just wanted to make a living writing stuff that if I could reach an audience, that would be great. And um, it was funny. There was one area where I was a little anxious because I remember seeing the film the first time, and it was me and David and Howard Shore, and he had a temporary score. But here's another important lesson that probably most people don't need to learn, but I did. We were talking afterwards about the film, and they were talking about the score. And Howard said, "You know, I was thinking kind of a lean, sort of electric guitar, kind of spare score kind of thing." And I said, "Oh God, yes, everything I write should have like a lean electric guitar score." And David looked at me, he looked at Howard, and he said, "Strings." I was like, he
And that
wasn't
was that.
asking you. That was that. But I remember the first time I saw it, and in fact, I had this concern on the stage too, because you know, the amazing experience was like watching all these actors show up and do what I had written, and it was like, holy shit! And then William Hurt showed up, who's just, I mean, he's William Hurt, and he was of everyone there, just where I got closest to him. He was just a beautiful, surreal character, and uh, then he started playing the part, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I wanted to blow my brains out. I thought, okay, well, David knows what he's doing. I know, and I didn't see too much of it. And then I saw the screening of the film, and I remember talking to. I was working on a Dennis Lehane project at the time. I'd adapted a story of his, and
Nice.
I called him. I called him up afterwards because I had a bunch of things made. I mean, if you know, I've got a credits on some stuff, and then for every movie I have a credit on the straight to video world. There's 4 other movies that I like did massive rewrites on, or thank God my name's not on. But I said I've only had the experience of seeing something I wrote be terrible. And not because, and it's easy to say if you see the films, not because of my writing, because there's very little of that, just terrible movies. I go, I know, but I'm like, but I go, I don't know what's like. I just sort of saw this thing happen, and he goes, yeah, it's really hard. It's like your best. It's like all your only reaction as a writer watching a film finally is going to be either, well, they fucked it up, or oh, I guess they didn't fuck it up. Like you don't get that thing at least at first. But I remember being really anxious because Bill just, I was like, oh God, he's looking at another movie. What's going on here? It's like, oh God, maybe no one will notice. I'm like, and it took me a little while. I went to a couple, you know, our first test screening was a complete catastrophe. To the
Oh
credit of the
gosh.
studio, I remember. But my favorite line from that is talking to Bob Shea afterwards, the head of the studio, and he goes, "Yeah, apparently these are our worst numbers since 7."
Well,
Like,
well.
oh, okay. And I go, and thank you for framing it that way. And then we're talking to those guys. So I was like, well, what are you going to do? And they're like, man, nothing. It's like they were just looking, they were using screenings correctly, I would argue, to figure out how to market it.
Mhm.
And it's not that something good can't come out of that, but like there was no pressure to change the film, even though we had gotten the worst rating since 7, that terrible piece of shit. And yeah, that I just saw for the 18th time a month ago. And so that was with an audience that wasn't enjoying it. But then I went, there was another screening where they did, and I kept going to screenings, and it was like every time you could feel like people, you know, there's something about seeing a thing with an audience where you're seeing it through their eyes. Um, I just showed a friend of mine's wife who had never seen Godfather, believe it or not, Godfather. And it was great. I got to
Okay.
like a vampire. I got to just like suck the experience of seeing Godfather for the first time out of her while I sat next to her. But it started to really hit me that Bill Hurt was not just playing, like that scene was doing great. I really started to understand what he had done, because that way you're a writer. Think about that script on the page. That character has got to carry so much weight as essentially, it's not the kind of movie where really he is the central villain of the thing. And he's only in it for what, 12, 13 pages? You've got to, how do you build all the emotional content you need out of that relationship in 13, 14 pages in that many minutes? And Bill's a guy who got it. He was like, you blow it out of the water. You first of all, he's come to a different place. He's in a different movie. It is a completely different time and place that Vigo goes back to. And it got to the point where when I do Q&As, even to this day, I'll find out what time the thing's starting, and then I will get there. However, I always make sure I get there in time to watch him. I'm happy with the film. I don't, I think I watched it again a couple of years ago. And I was like, oh, but I don't need to see it again. But I am so happy to show up for the last few minutes and watch William Hurt just like go to town. It just fills me with joy. And he's amazing. And I was so happy when he got nominated too, because it's, and I think, because you guys were talking about that a little bit, like, how come him? I think that's kind of why. I think people recognize,
Mhm.
especially actors, because the Academy, like you're nominated by your own branch and then everybody votes on the main award. Actors were looking at that and going, this guy just took a character who barely exists on the page and made him a satisfying full course meal in the last 10 minutes of the movie. And yeah, he was just amazing. He was just amazing, and it was so gratifying when he get nominated. And I hadn't seen him for a few months, and bumped into him again at the Academy Award nominees luncheon, and it was just like
Nice.
very emotional reunion. And just love him so much.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Even there was definitely one part of the movie for me that grew over time. I don't even remember how I felt the first time I watched the movie because everything was so new and big. But with each subsequent rewatch, getting to that sequence in Philly, like you said, I think that's perfect. It's just like it's a whole different movie. It perfectly
Yeah,
captures just the past that he's going away from, the brother trying to drag him back into it, and Vigo refusing it. Um, yeah, I think it's hard to be that memorable in such a short amount of time. So
well, I mean,
hats off to
I
him.
get, people still quote him. And I'll get thinking, people come at the, on the internet and they'll talk about how, like, oh, he's so great. This memorable line, his memorable line. People talk about how do you fuck that up? And I'm like, that is not even, look at that on the page. There's nothing special about that line. It's not,
It's all
it's not Ned
performance.
Beatty and Network. You know what I mean? It's how do you
Yeah.
fuck that up? It is entirely him. And I learned this long ago, but it's like, I'm so happy to get some of that residual credit. Yeah, I wrote that line. It's a nothing line, but people think it's a great line because he said it so goddamn well, and just yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and what like what came after? Like, did you ever have after the success of A History of Violence? Did you ever feel the need or desire to adapt something more, or did you prefer to focus more on your
Oh
own
yeah, sorry, yeah, you were
personal
sort of asking sort of
projects?
after that. Yeah, so I'll get that, but it's like
Yes.
that. So the whole experience was amazing. The film comes out, It did well. It wasn't a massive hit, but it got amazing reviews. You know, and then sort of like award season came along, and that was surreal because that's a process where like I'd never, you know, I'm like, I love movies. I sort of follow that stuff a little bit, but I never really like you. Nobody follows the awards race like someone who might get nominated. And it was just so clear from everything I was writing that I was in the game, and I was like, that's so weird. And I was fully prepared to wake up on the morning and find out I wasn't. And then, you know, getting nominated for that was just like wild because I also felt like it was a movie that could easily be misunderstood or kind of written off as a genre film if you don't pay too much attention. And
Yeah.
that was incredible. And doing the whole award because there was a whole bunch of, you know, got nominated for the Guild Awards and the BAFTAs and the Oscars and a whole bunch of other ones. You know, the Edgars, the Mystery Awards, and a lot of it was sort of the same people. So we all got to travel around to these things together. And I was really fortunate because I was in the same category as Brokeback Mountain, which is, you know, Larry McMurtry, and Diana Osana, his co-writer, who's been a friend now for years. But like, it is so not hard to, you know, get the good seats at the BAFTAs or the Oscars and lose to Larry McMurtry. Like, oh no, America's Greatest Writer just beat me. I'm at best
Tough
I
luck.
came in fifth. Yeah, you know. So that was just a lot of fun, and it definitely redounded to my benefit career wise. I got a lot of opportunities to do a lot of really interesting work. I did kind of early on sort of make a decision that like I just can't do. There's just kind of studio film just I can't write as tempting as it is, and as much it's like it will kill me. And I don't know, that may have been a mistake or not, but so I ended up doing a lot more work that was kind of more personally satisfying to me that may not have been as richly rewarding and unfortunately harder to get made. So it's like one of those things where people are like, well, he's not working. And I'm like, oh, I've been working steadily for 20 years. And it's just,
You
you
just
know,
don't know it.
stuff doesn't get made. Or in some cases, you guys did mention, God help me, trigger warning. Sometimes it does. I would say there's 6 words I wrote in that script and would prefer not to be judged by that
Gosh.
film. Even though in a very surreal fashion, it was a massive hit, like gigantic hit. Probably half your listeners never even heard of it. It was crazy. And and I remember it was sort of happening around the time the Sight and Sound thing came out. And I thought, so I've got a movie right now that literally a billion people have seen that no one's talking about. And then I have this issue of Sight and Sound where they're still talking about this thing I wrote 20 years ago that didn't make any, you know, made I think $11 million when it came out. So that's all kind of surreal. But yeah, it opened the door to do stuff. It gave me a certain kind of security. There's a certain, you know, you have an asterisk after your name. It gets you into rooms that you wouldn't normally. And I took advantage of it in ways that were personally satisfying, probably a little bit more than they were, you know, financially gratifying, which yeah. Um, so it's you know, a screenwriter's life is a weird one. And I wouldn't recommend it for someone who has any other skills. But yeah, it's just it's been really interesting. The people I've gotten to work with, you know, I got to do and you know, it wasn't the dream project, but I got to, you know, fly to New Zealand for a while and work on the Halo script with Peter Jackson right before Microsoft pulled the plug on that. And I've written a script with Mick Jagger, and you know, I got to spend a summer hanging out on Willie Nelson's bus because I was writing a singing cowboy movie for him. And you know, that was one of those jobs where you're like, I think we all knew no studio is ever going to make a singing cowboy movie, but they were paying for it, and you could spend the summer hanging out with Willie and Bob Dylan, and you're like, yeah, sure,
You
I'll
make
do
the
that.
most of that.
You too, but yeah, believe me, it's not hard to make the most out of that. And so yeah, there's been just kind of incredible experiences, and then it's also sort of opened doors in terms of like other places in the world where I've gotten to be sort of involved a little bit more in kind of, you know, politics and stuff. And I had a political podcast for a while where we got amazing guests that, you know, there's just no getting around it. It's like the you know, Academy Award nominee for a movie that you actually remember, you know, so and so hosting this thing. People are like, oh, I'll go talk to him. So it's brought nothing but good. It is, and it's still like you still go back and forth because there's that thing where I think did you guys say something? You said something like, you know, here's this movie, or maybe it was something else just recently. It was like, you know, it's funny how this film just doesn't feel like other David Cronenberg films. I wonder why. It's like, well, I don't wonder why. um, oh God, there was I shouldn't even name it if I can remember. There was a book that came out a couple years after the movie. It was a Canadian film professor who wrote a book on a history of violence.
I think I
And he
might
was
have read that one actually. I remember
oh
I had like 10 years ago a little, like, like one of those essay books, like 80 pages, just like
Mhm.
analyzing the movie. I think I read that actually, if it's the same one.
maybe he was so buried in his auteur theory and had not done any real research. He just listened to like David's commentary and stuff. And one I'm trying to remember, what was the other, there was one, oh, one point he talks about how like Olson might be seemed like a weird choice for David to hire to write a script, but and then he goes back and he finds this horror movie I wrote and made and directed, and he's trying
Oh
to like
yeah.
desperately connect. I'm like, David has never heard of Infested, believe me, he's never seen it, he never heard of it. Oh, and by the way, he didn't hire me either. And but he had this whole thing, it was so crazy, he goes on and on and on. It's really interesting when he was promoting the film, critics would ask him about, how there were sort of echoes of other movies here, a lot of film noir and stuff like that. Nobody ever picks up on the Unforgiven of it all either. I'm like, I love Unforgiven,
Mm.
and there's still like
Well, just
the
the
Wainwright's
Western
line.
tone is totally there as well.
Yeah, and it's also, but also in that kind of modern day version of it. There's a line William Hurt has
Hmm.
where like he's talking about Ed Harris. He says like something about how like he said your house smelled of pig or something, and you're like, yeah, that's a nod because William Money's a pig farmer in Unforgiven. But these critics would ask David about like these old film noir, like Out of the Past and all this other stuff. And he'd go, well, I've never seen that. And this guy came to the conclusion, well, much like Tom Stahl in the movie, David is pretending to be somebody he's not when he's answering these questions. And I'm sitting there going, no, he's never seen those movies. In fact, probably if I pointed out the references to them, he'd cut them because he's not that guy. But it just never occurred to this guy that there might be another creative voice involved with the process. And that's always like, it's one of those things where you're like, oh, it's frustrating because, I'm the guy who found this book and I'm the guy who took it to that next level. And everything David did with it is just like, he just knocked it out of the park. It could not have been, God, I had a friend who's a great filmmaker come up to me after he saw it. He said, I've never seen a director do more honor to a script than he did yours. It's like, I felt the same way. And then you go like, so given a choice between spending the rest of your life having everybody give credit to the director for stuff you did, or everybody giving you credit because the director fucked up the movie, and I'm like, it's an easy choice. But
Yeah.
I do hate the auteur theory. I do hate the film by credit.
Yeah, that always feels like it's the great tragedy of the film industry of just like making movies is that it's do you wonder, I'm curious how you feel with your experience, do you wonder that it comes out of, and I mean that in the best of ways, like people's ignorance or just like wanting to ignore the fact that you do have all of these various cogs, like the classic of like, oh, that shot is amazing because of the cinematographer, and it's like, well, but there's
So
50 other people that work on that shot and costume and props
sure.
and sets. Like, do you think it comes out of that, or just because it's way easier to just say director did it, it's credit to
It
him and
comes out
that's
of
it?
something. My friend Dan Waters, who wrote Heathers, once said, "Oh, actually, he didn't. He was quoting his
Right.
brother. In fact, Mark. Mark is a director, and Mark said this to him as a director. He said, if you come up with an idea and you're in the same area code as a director, he will think it's his. And that is, and I've been around a ton of directors, and I've directed, and it's like you have to adopt this mindset to some sense of like, it's how you get the thing done. This is my creation in the best. And if you're good, you're aware of the fact that the people around you are, and by the way, I should say like David, I was meeting people on his crew who worked with him as far back as like Shivers, it was amazing. Like
Whoosh.
his crew is family. They love him. And you don't do that if your director's a dickhead. He's great to them and they love him. But you have to sort of take ownership of the film while you're making it. It's the only way to do it. And that makes perfect sense. Um, People have different approaches. My friend Joe Dante, who I do the podcast with, if you'll notice in a lot of his films, the writer of the movie plays a part in the film. And
Mhm.
Joe does that not just to save money, but he likes having the writer on the set. So he kind of
Smart
gets
move.
it from a different angle. But yeah, but I think it comes out of that sense, and I think it comes out of it comes out of the DGA. I mean, they're a very powerful union, and it's in their best interest, and I get on my soapbox a little bit, but it's in their best interest to maintain that hierarchy. For it has to be easier to fire writers than directors in their minds. So everything comes from that. The film by credit is all about taking possession. In fact, I think you have to, at a certain point, you have to argue against it, or you have to just like, I could be wrong to me, but um, yeah, I find that credit kind of odious, and so do a lot of directors, and it's like, it's just a thing you don't, and I've never quite understood it because I said with Soderbergh, you don't need it. Like everyone still calls, if you see, they don't go, have you seen the new Soderbergh Len Dobbs film? They're like, have you seen the new Soderbergh film? And he only takes his name on it once, and it's like, yeah, he's going to get that. He's going to get the important credit, from the audience, from critics, regardless. And the movie already says directed by Steven Soderbergh, or written and directed by, as the case may be. So like that's already established. So what is the extra credit film by thing mean? Like it's very weird and frustrating. But that's why, and it's like they'll never change it. And the Writers Guild gave up a million years ago on trying to get them to change it. And, I do. What was, is it, Sidney Lumet was great. Yeah. Network. You watch Network. Remember the opening credits of it was Network by Patty Chayefsky. You're like, wow. And Lumet didn't care. They didn't have to fight over that. He's like, yeah, whatever. I directed it.
And over time, people remember Sidney Lumet.
Well, they all. That
it's always
movie,
a long
remember
time.
Patty Chayefsky. It's like that, definitely. There are movies that announce that they're written. That's definitely one of them. Glengarry Glen Ross. Like Pop Quiz. Who directed Glengarry Glen Ross?
I only remember David Mamet, and he did not direct.
That's right. I'm thinking about it. Yeah, exactly. My friend Dan, God bless him. Heathers. Who wrote Heathers? Dan Wrote. Who directed Heathers? Wait a minute.
All right.
It's on. But yeah, whatever. It's a tangent. I apologize.
No. It's super interesting. Super interesting. And then I think like the last thing I was really curious about is how these experiences with writing scripts have informed your journey into podcasting, because you briefly mentioned that before and throughout the episode, but just you were an early adopter, we could even say, of just like the podcast craze, but not just guys talking with a microphone, but also writing fiction podcasts like with Bronzedale.
Yeah,
that's been this whole process.
Yeah, and then beyond that, I mean, I think it's a really exciting medium. It's funny, I don't feel like an early adopter because I kind of got into it because my friend Dave Anthony, who's a comedian and a very successful podcaster, he does a show called The Dollop, which has been going on for years now, which is a great historical podcast. It's a comedy, but like just absolutely brilliant. And each week they take a story from American history, and then his partner doesn't know what it's going to be, and Dave walks him through it, and his partner's one of the funniest people alive. And they'll do anything from like, the George W. Bush story to the story of like, the dumbest pitcher in the history of baseball.
Okay.
And it's great. And he was like early on, he was somebody who was sort of like nudging me in that direction, and he's been doing it forever. But I just enjoyed it. I got into it early on. I liked the fact there's a really interesting aspect to it where, I think a lot of times you're listening through headphones that may help, but I think the best ones are ones that don't replicate like, a talk show. They're conversations, and you do sometimes in the best way, sometimes in the worst way, I guess, almost develop relationships with the people you're listening to because it's so sort of loose it just, it kind of fell into it because I was working with Joe Dante. He does this great site, Trailers from Hell, and I've been doing that for a long time. It's a lot of fun. A bunch of us do commentaries on trailers. Guillermo del Toro does it, Edgar Wright. I mean, amazing people. It hit me that I was talking to him at one point as this stuff was sort of happening, is that world was kind of blowing up. I was like, how come you don't have a Trailers from Hell podcast? And he started going, he's like, it's too much. You got all this equipment and all this, that, and the other thing. And I realized like Joe's thinking about it the way he's thinking about radio. And I called up my friend Dave, and I was like, I mean, I just get the sense that it's not that much. And he's like, yeah, it's not. Oh, and then also I should say it's terrible. I'm forgetting them. These guys were instrumental. There's a great podcast called Pure Cinema. They've been doing it forever. And they had me on an episode, and they actually just came to my house. We sat on my porch, we drank tequila. They put up their little microphones, and we talked for 2 hours. And I was like, hey, this is fun. And so I called up Joe, and I was like, why aren't you doing a podcast? He's like, it's too much work. I called up Dave. I was like, is it really? He's like, yeah, no, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And Dave came in, I brought him in to meet Joe, and he explained how easy it was. And I turned to Joe and I said, see, any idiot can do a podcast. And Joe said, yeah, I guess you're right. And then the next day he emails me. He's like, you're right. Any idiot can do a podcast. Why don't you host ours? And I was like, oh, that'll be fun. We'll give it a shot. And we sort of put everything together. And I was like, well, what are we going to do that's different? And it sort of stumbled into itself. My first guest, and for the first year or two, was all like, if you're listening to it, it's friends of ours, people we have access to easily. And I live a couple doors down from the director, Miguel Arteta, and he's a good friend. And we'd had a ton of conversations about Russ Meyer. And I thought, I've never read that, and I've never seen him talk about him. And Miguel's not the guy where you would go, if I tell you Quentin Tarantino's a big Russ Meyer fan, you're like, of course he is. John Waters, of course he is. Like, Miguel Arteta? So I was like, let's have Miguel come on and talk about Russ Meyer. And it sort of found itself very quickly of like having filmmakers talk about other people's work. It also came out of like, as I was doing it, I realized in the early days of Laserdiscs, when Criterion was kind of forging the path for commentaries, Laserdiscs were really expensive. And the thing that put me over, because I was like struggling, working crew and did a lot of money, and these were really expensive, was when they came out with Taxi Driver with a Scorsese commentary. And I was like, oh, I got to hear this. I finally bought a Laserdisc player even. His commentary on Taxi Driver sucks ass. I don't even know if you can get it anymore. I'm sure people loved it, but it's just him telling stories from the set. And I'm like, I have 2 hours with Martin Scorsese to talk about Taxi Driver. I don't want to hear about somebody getting food sickness when they were shooting this scene. I want to hear about shooting this scene. I want to hear about what brought him to this. But then Scorsese did a commentary track for a Michael Powell film. And all of a sudden you're going to film school with two great filmmakers, because not only is he sort of explaining Michael Powell for you, but he's also, in doing so, explaining Scorsese to you. And I was like, that's interesting. And that's sort of how we found the movies that made me. And I love doing it. It's like, it's gotten to the point now where, we do it all the time. And, we do like 40, 45 episodes a year. It is, we're out there enough that now people come to us. All these PR people will approach us and we check out movies, and we're still going after stuff we like. But sometimes I'll read a book that I love, or see a movie I love, and I'll be like, I want to talk to that person in a way that you wouldn't have. Like, I don't know, sometimes you walk out of a great movie and it's like, especially in my line of work, it's like, I would never have reason to write with this person. They don't write with any, there's no professional reason to. If I met them at a party, it might be nice, but like, I would love to talk movies with this person. And you can't just pick up a phone and go, hi, you don't know me, but you have an hour to talk about Bresson or whatever. So here's this incredible license, and people, I'm telling you, like, all of our guests have had a great time doing it, and people come back and do it more. And it's fun. And I enjoyed it so much that started branching out. Dave and I did for a long time. We did a political podcast called The West Wing Thing, which came out of a conversation we had where I realized people were doing episodic cover, each week they cover a different episode of a show, the next one, but they were always fans. And I was like, has anybody ever done a podcast where they do that with a show they hate? Because we both sort of shared the belief, which is now even more reinforced, that the West Wing's politics are anything but left leaning, and that the mentality that show sold is so responsible for where we are today. And we thought we'd run out of gas after like a season, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And we kept getting, by the time it was done, we were having like, Marianne Williamson came on while she was running for president, and we're making people watch an hour of this god awful show and then talk to us about its politics. And it's like, that was a blast. And I love doing that. And then I got approached in the middle of it because my agent at the time knew I was doing podcasts, even though it was a completely different thing. And she also knew I was a giant Lawrence Fishburne fan. I've been a fan forever. I think Deep Cover is one of the great, I love the film. I think it's one of the great performances. And she said, hey, Fish and Lawrence Tate are doing a project. It's an audio drama. It's a podcast. It's about black gangsters in the 40s. Would you have any interest in writing that? I was like, are you kidding me? And went in and got that job. And it was the most work I've ever done, because they were like hour-long episodes mostly, 45 minutes to an hour, kind of like a TV show, but dramatized. The scripts were just like regular scripts. It's like writing a TV show, except you don't have any visuals. Like, you kill for one visual an episode. You can't. And I'm a screenwriter. I hate exposition. So I can't have anybody go, hey, Jimmy, there's a guy lying on the floor with a knife in his back. How did he get there? You have to, it's challenging, but I've never had a better time. I got, when we were really going, I had about a week to deliver each episode. Minimal, with the exception of one of them. Yeah, it was tight. And with the exception of one thing where there's just one thing that the producers felt was just like a wrong direction. I didn't rewrite anything really. So it was so fast that it was all coming from like this almost kind of visceral place. And then we're sitting in the studio with this incredible cast. Like if you go on the Broswell website, just run down the list. It's like some of the best actors alive are like coming in to do this thing. Cause you can record your 5 episode appearance in a day, maybe 2. You get out of your car, you walk in, there's no hair, there's no makeup, there's no nothing. You're like there and you get into it. And there's a real energy to it. And I would find myself, forgive me for talking, but I would find myself sitting there going, oh, this is a great scene. Oh, this is what I wrote. Because it hadn't lived, you get this. How many times I hadn't rewritten it 3,000 times. I wasn't sick of it. I, in fact, written this scene so long ago, I'd forgotten it. And now I'm hearing it fresh and kind of going, oh, hey, it's actually good. So it was really, really gratifying, and we had a great response to it. It was successful. We got to go to actual Brownsville in Chicago and meet people who lived there, who had been through kind of ours was fictional, obviously, but who really liked it. And and it was no secret that it was sort of designed to be turned into a TV show. We ended up having a bunch of different places wanted to do it. We sold it to a studio, and it literally went from being the best creative experience I've ever had to the worst, because even though it was all laid out, they were like, what's the first season? I'm like, what's first season? I can tell you what the 38th minute of the 5th episode of the first season is. It's right in front of you. We'll expand it. We'll make it more visual. I can now do all that stuff I want to do. And that was great for a little while. There was a change in administration, and then somebody decided that like they were just going to turn it into a different show, and it just became, so it's never happened. But that's the business we're in. And but it was an incredible experience. I had such a good time, and it was one of those things where like, I was very aware that I'm like a white guy writing about this experience. I could not in a million years, if it had been contemporary, I couldn't write about a black gang in Los Angeles in 2025. That would feel just so completely. But because there was that distance, first of all, that none of us had lived through, and there is a whole kind of mythology that you're kind of tapping into, and cultures that we all know only secondhand. And then also the fact that like I was the only, like I said this often, there was a bunch of white producers who called me to come in and write this. I would not have even taken the meeting, but I was literally the only white creative person on the project. So, I had people over my shoulder. I mean, like the best notes I got were all those things like, yeah, man, that would never happen in a black church. And I'd be like, I'm going to argue that point with you. Yeah, it's like, you're not stepping on my ego with these notes. So it was just fun. And I love it. I love the immediacy of it. I love that you can get across, I love old time radio. So it was really fun to do that. And for a while, I set up a studio at Warner Brothers where we were going to be doing audio dramas with a bunch of like great writers. And they were going to be, the idea was that like, if it's, we give you a budget, and if it's successful, we go on as producers, as on the TV show. And if it doesn't, you get your show back, which is an unusual thing. Usually if somebody buys your stuff, it's like they own it forever. So we would get people to come to us with their babies, their passion. Like, what's the TV show that you've never been able to sell? Matt Weiner had Mad Men in his back pocket for 15 years. It was like the thing he wanted to do. Like, what's your Mad Men? We'll make it. And, if it flops, if nothing comes from it, you get it back. And if it's a hit, we get to be producers on it. And then I had done work with him. It's a whole long story, but then Mick Jagger got involved and became one of my partners on the thing, which was wild. And then it just all went to hell, having nothing to do with him or me. It was just a lot of changes at Warner Brothers. It was just like, oh God damn it. But but Joe and I are still doing the movies that made me. I've started doing a new one that we do once a month with a friend called The White Cannon. My friend's a black leftist attorney in New York, and we take movies that are like beloved by white audiences and kind of unknown by black ones, or sort of, not. And then we bring in, the black guest and a white guest, which is always a weird thing. You're like, who's our white guy this week? And then we talk about him, but it's not, we're not tearing them apart. It's not like you're racist if you like this movie. And we're also not doing that thing where it's like, some rapper hearing Stairway to Heaven for the first time. It's like they're really interesting conversations. And some of the movies are movies we love. Some of the movies aren't. And it's just been so much fun. I can't wait till the Casablanca one comes out, because that was, there's so many things where you're sitting there going like, does this stand there? Am I, and I'm fine. You can tear apart my favorites. I'm still going to love them. But all I'll say is that Casablanca survives the test of time in a way that very few films do, and it just but yeah, that's been really fun. So yeah, I love podcasting. It keeps me sane because you get to talk to other people who do what you do and kind of confirming how crazy the business we're in is and how grueling and soul destroying it could be, and then reminding each other of what it is that we love about it. Sorry, very long answer to your question. I apologize.
No, 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 no. It's very interesting. I do think at the end of the day, that's always what keeps you going, right? Just like all the actual like day to day, the process of creating and everything. But then the moment you actually have the full film, the full show, the full whatever that just
Yeah.
exists and people can kind of experience it, it's so gratifying that you hope in the best of cases you're just happy with that that it exists.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah. No, and I love when people connect with it. It's gratifying, and that's also, I guess, been a problem where the same week I turned down that giant franchise thing I told you about, I took a job writing a Batman cartoon, which
Okay,
I want to
yeah.
say I got $1,500 for. And to this day, my age, he's my agent. Then he's retired. He's a good friend. He still cracks up about that because, like I said, I could be living in my house on the moon, um, but it was like the Batman thing was so much fun, and it's like I love that people got to see it and enjoyed it, and that's all I can really think about. I can't take in what it means to think about your audience beyond just whoever finds it and likes it. You
Hmm.
know, so but yeah, it's called Batman Gotham Knights, and it was a compilation, one of those DVD Blu-ray things that DC did, where to come out in between the Nolan films, and it was American screenwriters and Japanese anime directors,
It's
and
coming together.
it was really really fun. I got to just have a blast doing mine, and I love dragging it out every now and then, especially like. I get to show it to my niece recently. Who just turned 16, got into anime a year or two ago, and I was like, "Oh, Uncle Josh has something you're gonna."
Fantastic. So the last question I wanted to ask you then is, what's next? Of course, like you're continuing all this podcast, but do you have that you can talk about? Of course,
Yeah, I mean,
but
nothing I
like
can talk about.
projects that you would
I've
like that
been.
you have in your drawer, like deep down that you would like
Yeah, I
to
mean,
make
there's
soon.
always a ton. You're always that is the other thing too in this business is you're
Mm,
constantly there's a kind of I know nothing about your circumstance. I'm going to make assumptions, but like when I was your age, I was or I don't know younger, maybe not the same age, but I was living in a very small apartment. I had a very small monthly nut I had to make, and it was somehow scrambling to make things work. But I had the luxury of just I'm writing a script right now. And then you get to a place weirdly where you're making more money and now you're doing it professionally and you have to be doing 18 other things at all times. And
mhm.
that can be grueling. And also the business is just collapsing around our ears. I've been writing occasionally, I mean, a lot actually. My friend John Brancato, who wrote the movie The Game,
Mm.
he and I sort of fell into writing a script together about a decade ago and just had a really good time doing it. It's the thing that actually, it's not the second thing we did was the thing that eventually became Trigger Warning. And all I'll say is, I wish, yeah, the script's good. Uh, the original script's good.
Here's your one.
But yeah, but I mean, we've sold stuff. We've gotten some assignments. Stuff has been made. We're doing a thing right now. I mean, it's like I can't talk about the thing we're working on right now, and then we're also writing a spec, and I can't talk about that. So it's like there's nothing. Put this way, there's nothing close enough to coming out that I can go, oh, I have a film coming out in 3 months. But
Mm.
you're constantly kind of banging away at stuff. But it is a weird time in the film business, and I don't know if it's ever going to go back. And I guess the only thing I'd say to to younger folk, and one of the things I love about doing the show is if I were still in my 20s, I'd be tapped into this world naturally. But I'm not, and I'm not hanging out in the places that these people do. I'm sort of living my life at my home, my kid, my wife, and writing at home, and the meetings I go to are with people who are not starting out and not struggling for the most part. But there is this whole world of indie filmmakers that's sort of coming up now. There's people like Jim Cummings, who's really interesting.
Mhm.
And I get to meet these people, and I'm always looking for them for the show because I'm looking for interesting guests. There was a movie last year called Hundreds of Beavers. I don't know if
Oh yeah,
you're
yeah,
aware,
yeah. I've seen it
which
twice.
was Oh yeah, which is an amazing. Like, I showed it to Joe, and he had the exact same. I was like, you know what? It's 20 minutes too long, and here's the problem. There's no B material to cut. It's not like you can cut out the jokes that aren't quite as good because it's all great. I'm like, yeah, it's too good for its own good. But those guys did an amazing job of like making the film and marketing it independently of everyone. Jim Cummings seems to do that. There's all these people who are like doing
Mm.
films and figuring out ways around systems who definitely understand that the old ways collapsing and who still have, and I will say it is genuinely a luxury, who still have the luxury, I think, I don't know in all their cases, of, living in a small apartment and not having to maintain it and being able to devote their time to just work that is meaningful to them as they build, a career and starts to become lucrative. Which in a funny way is what we do with the podcast, because it was literally like we didn't even think about how to make money with it for the first couple of years. It was just fun, and then we had this backlog, and we could start going, oh look, we've done this, and then we start getting sponsors, and which kind of what a lot of these folks are doing with movies, where they're making them, they break even, they're getting seen, and they're building an audience, and then they do more, and then, it feels like 5 years maybe since like Jim Cummings is a guy who did a short I heard about and thought was great to now he's a guy who's written and directed, half a dozen movies that
Yeah.
are getting distribution. And he's now a kind of, I don't want to say elder, he's not elder at all. He's a statesman. He's really out there doing his best to like help other people do what he's doing. And so that stuff gives me hope. I think there's a future where far fewer people are going to get rich making movies. But I think there's still an opportunity, and there may be an opportunity for more people to actually maybe like squeak out a living doing it.
Hmm.
And you wouldn't do this podcast if I didn't know the answer to this question. Like, what's motivating you? Like, do you want? Are you doing this because you want to get fabulously wealthy, Nicolo? I don't think you are.
Not from doing podcasts. Not from doing
Yeah, but I
podcasts.
mean, even though to make movies, I mean, you want to reach an audience. You like ideally make a living doing it, right? But
That's the
um,
dream. That's the dream. But it's always one of those things where I feel like I'm 28 years old this year. I did film school for my master's when I was 2021.
good God,
Um, yeah, like it's just time is starting. I've reached that point where like time is moving very quickly. Things are piling up on top of each other. Um, but it
it's
is one of
not.
those
You're gonna be
things.
okay. Don't worry. It's really
That,
not. I don't know how to.
that's always the thing. Like I feel that's one of the problems that I feel with my generation is that when I started like making movies, everything was already digital, and that's when you started getting the Vine, and then it's TikTok and all the YouTube, and everything is
Yeah,
so quick, and success is always right around the corner if you work hard
yeah,
enough, if you do the thing. Where it puts so much pressure that sometimes I have to like step back and remind myself like I'm only 28 and all of these things have already happened. Like I've already directed a dozen short films. I'm working full time as a film editor. Like things are going well. Just take my time. There's no rush.
yeah.
There's no rush for
There,
one
there,
person
there is
risk.
none. And I will say, at the risk of dating myself, I remember being a kid and just thinking, like, well, there's good news and there's bad news. I'll be alive to see the year 2000, but I'll be so fucking old I won't be able to appreciate it because I was going to be in my mid 30s. In my mid 30s.
Perspective is
And you get there and I'm like, oh my God, I'm perfect. Not that the year 2000 was anything, but you're like, it's never been better than my mid 30s. 20 suck. Hopefully things get better. But yeah, there's no rush. And I do remember we were sitting at the BAFTAs with George Clooney, who was there for Good Night and Good Luck. And,
Mhm.
he worked for years, like acting before it kind of happened for him. And I remember the two of us just having a really nice conversation and toasting ourselves for being, the joy of being a late bloomer. Um, it's because there's so many things you think when you're in your 20s, and so many ways you can make terrible, terrible mistakes because you don't realize that life really is actually very long. But yeah,
And
I
to
mean,
enjoy that to the fullest as well. It's
yeah,
like it's gonna
yeah,
last, hopefully, so make the most of it.
yeah. But yeah, the business is very, very weird right now. But I think there's room to kind of like make yourself known and heard in ways that were not as easily accessed, when I was starting out. I mean, certainly just the fact that you can make a movie on an iPhone is like, I don't, if you grew up with them, I don't think you can fully appreciate the enormity of that. Even when I was a little kid, I did Super 8 films, which meant I had to save up money to buy a camera, and then I had to save up money to buy film, and then I had to, edit in
Actually
Super
cut
8.
it in the machine.
Yeah. And you gotta, yep. And now I can, do all this on my phone, and it's ridiculous. But
Literally.
yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted, because you guys did such a great job, and all I really wanted to do was just come on and go like, I'm so impressed. But you really did get sort of like my response, like that reading the book and why I made the changes I made. I was just like, I just want to come on and thank those guys. So
It means a lot, honestly. Thank you for having this conversation with
sure,
me, and
it was a
yeah,
pleasure.
just highlighting, because I think that's also something that I would like to do more with this podcast going forward. Um, is highlighting more of the writing process, because at the end of the day, it is an adaptation, and someone has to write that adaptation. It doesn't just, like you were saying, it doesn't just magically happen. David Cronenberg
Yeah,
did not contact you to just write it for him. So no, it's always interesting to hear all of those behind the scenes tidbits, and just your own creative process, and how all of that influences you going forward.
well, yeah, and adaptations are so interesting too. I mean, I've done a ton of them, and I really like, been at it long enough. I'm probably forgetting one or two that don't fit this, but all I can say is that every single one of them has been a different process. And early on realizing like a couple of movies I love are like, uh, I saw an interview with Buck Henry talking about adapting Day of the Dolphin, which, like, when he describes the book, you're like, that sounds insane. And I love that movie. It's good, delightful piece of junky wonderfulness. Or there's a great Don Siegel film I love called Charlie Varick, which is
Ooh,
based on a
okay.
novel that oh, if you don't know Charlie Varick, check it out. It is it's, oh my god, it's
I like Don
phenomenal.
Siegel, so
It's I think it's one of his very best films, and it comes out of a novel in which kind of the events of the movie. It's kind of a, my understanding, I could be wrong with the dates, is it's kind of a Godfather knockoff, but the events of the movie are events that are kind of happening mostly off camera in the background. Like the mob is dealing with the fact that somebody robbed a bank of theirs in New Mexico, and they got to send somebody out to. That's just a thing that happens in it. The entire movie is about the guy who robs that bank, and this
ooh,
guy's
okay.
attempt to get him. And like if you watch Charlie Varick and someone goes, "It's based on a novel that's a knockoff of The Godfather," you'd be like, "What the fuck are you talking about? It's about a guy who robs banks in the desert." It's truly great. It is truly, truly great film. And stuff like that, where I sort of started realizing early on that like adaptations are not just transcriptions. Um, and I'm just there's a great. It's never getting made now. If you ever, I hate pushing stuff on people, but if you're into adaptations, I mean, there's a Dennis Lehane short story called Until Gwen. That's the one I
Ooh, okay.
adapted, and Dennis loved it. He thought it was one of the best scripts adaptations of his things ever read, and he also thought she said it's like it's so much what I was thinking. But if you read the short story and you read the script, it's there's so much in the script that's not in the story, but that it was one of those things where I just read it and I was just completely in lockstep. I understood what he was doing and I wanted to do more of it. So he's reading scenes that aren't even mentioned in his story, and he's like, "That's what I had in mind," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's what I'm looking for," like that's fun. And there's other ones where you just like hear some mechanical stuff and make it more interesting, and you do that, or tell the story backwards, or cut the main story and just focus on a minor character, or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But they're always different, and it's a really fun process. And that's why I think it's really interesting that you're doing this show, because I think I couldn't do it. How are you weekly? I don't even remember. I've looked like the idea of having to read that many books, watch
Bi-weekly.
that many movies.
Bi-weekly.
It just seems like a lot of work, man.
The trick is audiobooks is plane flights. I've been traveling a lot
Mm,
recently, and those two
yeah,
hours early in the airport, 2 hour flights. After
there you
it's like
go.
5 hours a day, you start getting in those pages. It helps. It helps.
That's
But
good.
also
Do you know
just
about? There's
just the
also look, I forgot. There's one thing I got. There's a thing called the Scripter Awards that I also got nominated for. It was lovely honor, but they give. They're trying. It's a nice thing they're doing. I still don't understand it. Nobody involved can fully explain it to me. They're trying to honor the writers of the original work and the adaptation,
okay.
and so you both get the award. And I remember, like, I'm always coming back to like So do you give, like, if somebody adapts Shakespeare, it's like, what do you exactly award? Because it's like, it's one thing to like, yeah, they did a really loyal Shakespeare adaptation. It's great. It's like, Henry V. It's Kenneth Branagh. But what if somebody takes a really bad book and turns it into a really good movie? Are you still, you know what I mean? There's so many different conflicts and contradictions there. I've never been able to quite figure it out because
It sounds like a good idea on paper until you think about it.
exactly. Yeah, but they've been doing it for decades. So what do I know? But anyway, you're doing great work here, and I doff my hat to you, sir. So
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank
I was
you.
going to ask you if you have one last thing that you want to say to people, to people like me and others who are aspiring writers, people who want to adapt. But I think it goes back to what you said in the beginning, honestly, your story of just be yourself. I think it also encapsulates what you talked about with your career. You followed what you really wanted to do, and it led to those amazing opportunities.
Because I mean that really, and the thing is, it's not as hippy dippy as it sounds. Because sooner or later, if you're not being yourself, you will be found out. And I don't mean like but it's just like it will catch up to you, and it'll impact you negatively. So why not just start from a position of like, this is who I am, and you either love me or you don't, but I can't be anybody else. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. A lot of things don't, but if it does, it's you're drawing on something that's real. And like I said, I found myself in a couple of jobs a couple of years after history where you're sort of like, it's just hard to say no, and you're like, you find yourself going, oh, I can do that, and that's a very different response than I should do that or I want to do that. And then you find yourself sitting there and you're like, I'm not going to be able to deliver. They want me to deliver something as good as History of Violence, and I can't, because History of Violence came out of like, just I had to, I felt it. I felt everything about it. And then you're writing something else and you're just like, I'm just a technician here, and that's not going to get me through. And it will catch up to you, and it will bite you in the ass. So why not just try to do stuff that you're passionate about,
Golden lesson. Golden lesson. Thank you so much, Josh, for being here with us. I don't know if you want to plug maybe your social media. I will definitely put the links to your other podcasts and previous work in the show notes. But if you have, I know you're very active on Blue Sky.
I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky and all that stuff. I should also, we didn't even get into this, but one of the other things that brought me to, and there's a great documentary that a friend of mine made called Dreams with Sharp Teeth, that is about the writer who made me want to be a writer, and who I got to actually, I think I'm the only person who ever wrote with him, Harlan Ellison, who's like one of the greatest American writers of all time. And
of course,
documentary, I think it's streaming. You can find it on like Prime and other stuff. It's called Dreams of Sharp Teeth. It's about Harlan. You get, if nothing else, you get the sense of what it's like to hang out with him for a couple hours. And I'm in it talking about writing with him and some other stuff. A lot of great writers in it. But it's really good. But I should just plug that because it's a great film and my friend made it. And I suddenly hit me. I feel very guilty that I didn't even mention Harlan and all the things that came out of this experience. But yeah, that was.
That's amazing. I'll definitely check it out. I love Harlan Ellison. So nice.
Oh, you'll enjoy it.
Sharing.
You will enjoy it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to this special episode of Anatomy of an Adaptation. You can follow the show on Instagram at Anatomy of Adaptation Pod to stay up to date to all future episodes. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you have a fabulous day. Goodbye.